What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Crypto Catch Up with me, Benny. Now, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on scaling blockchains. Now, if you need to see part 1, which I suggest you do, it's on-chain scaling solutions, where we looked at block size, consensus, and a few other things. So I'll put the link somewhere around here, and I'll also put it in the description. But this video is all about off-chain scaling solutions, or also known as Layer 2. We'll also quickly touch on directed cyclic graphs and the different projects and the different ways that they're going about utilizing these technologies. So let's get into it. All right, so off-chain, layer 2 solutions like I talked about. Well, we're going to look at state channels, also known as side chains. We're also going to look at Plasma or Plasma Cash, which is specific to Ethereum. Now, then I'll add on directed cyclic graphs at the end, but directed cyclic graphs aren't off-chain or on-chain per se, because they are a distributed ledger technology or a DLT, but they're not a blockchain specifically. They don't have the same logical linking of blocks or anything like that. They are at a transactional level. So we'll look at that shortly. So what makes off-chain scaling great? Well, this is something where a lot of, specifically Bitcoin Cash maximalists who are only doing on-chain scaling at the point in time will say that it's redundant. It doesn't fit with the economic model of Bitcoin. It is, stupid. It is something like that. For a second, please, if you are one of those, or you don't have a particular opinion either way, leave those opinions at the door and have a look at it from a business processing perspective. From a business processing perspective, a lot of these things make sense, and that's what we're talking about is, the opportunity that a solution like this might provide. So, what's good about them? Well, they're inherently private. State channels are completely private, more so than the main chain itself, which we'll talk about. They're longer term in nature. It's not something that you do a block size increase and then you have to hard fork and hard fork and hard fork and hard fork. They're mathematically exponential. So in terms of the solution of a state channel, we're talking millions, if not billions of transactions that can occur before that channel may close, which you then only have the opening channel and the closing channel as a transaction each side, rather than a million transactions, which obviously takes a lot of the pressure off that main chain. And it's built atop of the base protocol. So we can abstract away a bit of this, effort or this computational logic, etc., to happen over here and then come back and only put our results back to the main chain. And that's essentially what both state channels and Plasma are doing. Well, why are they bad? Well, there is arguments that they centralize control, which we'll talk about with state channels and their hubs. But it's arguable once again that if you have a network effect whereby more people start to use state channels or payment hubs, then if one payment hub closes down through censorship or government or otherwise, then you'll still have a way to route your payment from A to B. So, is that problem still really there? I'll leave that up to you. It's limited by stake. So in terms of a state channel, in terms of Plasma, more so the state channel side of things, you put up some form of funds to open that channel up, and you can only transact in the value that you have. And, I think that's fair. Why would you want to be transacting more than you actually have? Obviously, there's more parts to it, but it's a simple theory in that regard. And the fact that you need to monitor these channels. So, which is something that we'll get to in a second. I won't say it here. It'll ruin all the spiel for the next part. So let's have a look at state channels. Well, state channels are essentially taking that, that heavy work off the main chain into a chain on the side by itself. So the solutions that are currently out there for Ethereum is Raiden network, and then you have Lightning network for Bitcoin, which you probably have heard of. But the analogy goes like this. If you go down to your local coffee shop every month and you're getting a coffee every single day for that month while you're at work, why would we want to do, let's say, 30 transactions? Why would we not want to open up one transaction at the start and close it at the end of the month and everything in between is just a deduction of the balance that you put up at the start of the month. So if you know, like a prepaid bus card or anything like that, that you might spend up to $50 on coffee a month, you open a payment channel or a stake channel on the side through a smart contract. It allows you to do as many transactions as you'd like, as large or small, limited by that stake. Obviously, we could do 1 million of them, little tiny, incy-bincy transactions. But we only ever need to write back the final outcome to the main chain. So at the end of that, I run out of money, let's say, or it becomes the end of the month. The coffee shop closes that channel. It then gives me a period of time for what's known as like our, right to refute, or our rebuttal, to go, is the state of this correct? Are they saying that I've spent more than I actually have, etc.? And if it's all good, that channel closes off, you allow it to close off, and you are only paying then for those first 2 transactions. Now, this is where I talk about monitoring, because with those channels, if you've put up a couple of $100,000 and then you go to sleep and then they close that channel, you have a right to reply. But if you don't reply within the time frame, they could close off that channel before anything, you have a chance to obviously check that that's correct. That's why you'd need someone to monitor it. Now, this is something early days that's happening. We might obviously find a solution to that, but it is, one of the cons or the downsides of a Lightning network or a rated network at the point in time. Arguably, a small risk compared to a whole account being hacked or anything like that. Now, if we look at the Lightning network and what we talked about in our hubs, you can have a look at this testnet here. So this testnet, this always does that. Good on you. You can see here that all these nodes, that's you and I. And we could be transacting with all the people over here, right? So this guy transacts to this guy, but it has to route through a payment hub. So if I go to the same coffee shop as you, we have a payment routing that we can do. Just like if you have to send money overseas, it has to route through many banks. Obviously, if one of those banks shuts down, then you're not going to get your money. Same thing here. But this is obviously a bottleneck, because if this cuts off, every single one of these parties is cut off. They would have to then forge a payment channel here. Now, it's costly to set up a payment channel. So what I'm talking about in terms of the network effect is obviously the more people that use it, the more payment channels are, the more people around you that might have a payment channel already open that you can utilize and pay a very small fee to, which is one of the huge benefits of Lightning Network. And then off you go, happy days. So that's something to have a look at. But state channels and side chains in this regard is something that is showing huge promise, not only from a speed perspective, but from a business processing perspective, because it's a private transaction. Everything that happens off the chain, to and fro, to and fro, to and fro, we don't need to know about. We don't know about. We just know that you opened a channel with a particular amount and you close a channel with a particular amount. Everything that happens in between is completely up to you. In my opinion, it's a very good scaling solution for a business, for anybody that's not just a complete maximalist and that wants to argue that this technology is never going to move away from base protocols. Moving on. Plasma, like I said, Ethereum specific. So this was something that was proposed by Joseph Poon and Vitalik Buterin. Essentially, it's smart contracts within smart contracts within smart contracts. So what it allows you to do is from the root chain, for example, the whole concept is to parallelize the actual, transactions that we're going through, to spread the load, for 2 people to help rather than 1. Obviously, you get the job done in half the time. So you can commit to the root chain or the main chain a smart contract, which, for example, sets the rule of a game like chess. Because you can imagine right now, if we were to do chess on the main network and a block comes around every 10 minutes, I move my king, 10 minutes maybe before another one gets picked up, you move yours. That's not a very fun game. Whereas by utilizing this, you can put a smart contract on the root chain, set up these child chains or childs within child chains and on and go. And essentially you're talking billions of transactions a second. Now, Plasma had some cons to it, which they've come up with Plasma Cash, but what it allows us to do is then utilize these child chains here to run the game. So I can set my player up in a smart contract here, your friend sets a player up here, you then, you can do your transactions back and forth if you will, and it has a validator of that particular, child chain. It allows you to play your game back and forth, just like a state channel would allow you to do the same. It allows you to play it freely with only ever needing to commit back to the root chain the outcome of the fact that Ben sucks at chess. And that's a really good thing. Once again, we're taking the load off the main net, we're putting it within these smart contracts, and Plasma has a really good effect in that the only real downside to it is that you have to do what is known as a fraud proof if somebody's trying to rip you off within that network. So if you're playing a game with people around the world and you can find and see that somebody's tried to change or fudge some numbers or change the game outcome or something like that, just like if they were changing the value of a transaction on Bitcoin, you can propose a fraud proof to the root chain and prove that somebody's tried to rip you off because you didn't do that transaction. What then will happen is that you will get your funds back, and essentially these little child chains here will, at worst kick you off them. And what it means for you is that you get everything back. But what it means for them is obviously that they lose out on what it took them to set up that particular child chain, and they are obviously punished in some way from the network. So it is a really cool solution. It is incredibly complex, but that's another one, and it's very similar in concept to state channels, but different in its application. This is another one here, just talks about commitment of how to do like a book. So you could use a root chain and you could farm out the work to read this chapter, this chapter, this chapter, this chapter to other parties, and it would allow you to obviously, increase how fast you could get that done. Finally, directed acyclic graphs. So these here are individual transactions, and if we consider IOTA's network, IOTA has a policy in place essentially, or I've done it again, policy in place that kind of says, well, this transaction just has to validate 2 transactions in front of it, and then we're happy days. That's essentially their consensus mechanism. The downside to directed acyclic graphs, however, is the fact that they're prone to attacks or spam attacks on the network, because if you could imagine with IOTA, which has no fees, there's nothing to stop people from publishing thousands of useless transactions that are not transacting anything and actually slow down the whole network. We could push out billions of transactions and it would stop the network from being able to perform at that particular scale anymore. So that's some downsides. But as you can see, obviously, it allows multiple transactions to be handled at any one time. And as you get that network effect, more and more would be able to be handled. One of the other downsides also, though, is that IOTA needs a coordinator, which means it's semi-centralized. And what that coordinator essentially is doing is making sure that it can try and sync up each one of these little nodes as to what's going on. And that's been one of the biggest problems, is that people, they open their wallet and, 50 IOTA, refresh, no IOTA, can't sync, what the hell? And essentially this is the problem, is that there is no global state of the network. Each one of these little transactions kind of its own state. And so unlike Ethereum and Bitcoin and all of that, it's not a state-based machine. And it's really hard then to keep control of what's going on. This is future state, this is current state, and this is previous. And it kind of, prunes off those transactions. We don't care what's happened in the past. We care what's happening in the future and right now. So that's something to keep in mind. So what is the best approach? Well, for me, it's a hybrid approach. I like the idea of having an off-chain solution where necessary. You don't have to use it. It is up to you to use it. If you don't want to use it, that's fine. If you're a Bitcoin Cash maximalist, Bitcoin maximalist, whatever you want. but it's there. It allows you to do millions of transactions a second, billions if you please, and only obviously commit back to the chain what is necessary. In terms of Plasma, it allows you to play games and do all of those cool things that we need to do, and once again, only commit back what we do, and it has pretty good protective measures in place, and even better in Plasma Cash. In terms of on-chain and off-chain, if you've watched both, once again, you know, if we have to do a little bit of a block size increase, great, but I don't think that's a good solution moving forward. Just upping block limits, like we talked about, it's not mathematically exponential. It's linear. You'll hit that ceiling every time. It doesn't allow people. So maybe we up the block size, we implement sharding, and then we bring in an offline solution. So specific transactions have to go off to the side. I'll leave that up to you, but it's all for you to have a think about, do a little bit of research, and see what, you know, is your preferred method. Do you have a preferred way? You might be in this game because you have a, you know, a psychological kind of mindset that says, yes, it's got to be completely decentralized. It must be base protocol. Up to you. If there's any questions, leave them below and I'll answer them for you. As always, thanks for watching. You enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers.